I never believed a simple camera rule could decide whether I lived or died, but that was before I started photographing the abyss. Down here, light is a stranger, and the darkness has its own set of eyes. My crew gave me a list of 11 rules to follow, each more disturbing than the last, and every one of them tied to things lurking far below what most humans will ever see. I remember the first time I broke one, and the ocean reminded me why these rules exist. What I saw after the flash went off still haunts me, because it wasn't supposed to be down there. When I first joined the crew as a deep-sea photographer, the most important thing they drilled into me was this rule 1: never use a flash at 3,000 feet. They didn't explain it with scientific terms or detailed reasoning, just a heavy warning wrapped in superstition and unease. At first I laughed about it, thinking it was just another strange tradition among divers, but the way my captain's voice shook when he reminded me told me there was more beneath the surface than I could imagine. I had no idea how dangerous that single burst of light could be when aimed into the abyss. The ocean at that depth is not silent. It is alive with things most people will never see. Even without the flash, my camera picked up faint shadows brushing across the frame, shapes that seemed to bend unnaturally, as though hiding from the faint beams of our submersible's lamps. I could feel my skin prickle, as if unseen eyes were pressing against the glass around me. The black water pressed in from every side, heavy, infinite, swallowing sound and light until I felt smaller than dust. That was when I understood why rules existed here. The captain once told me the deep is not empty but full, too full, and the light acts like a signal flare. You call things with light, he said, leaning forward, and not everything that answers should be seen. I tried to joke about it, asking if it was like moths drawn to a flame, but his face didn't soften. More like predators drawn to blood, he whispered, and I stopped asking questions. Still, curiosity gnawed at me, a dangerous itch that only grew stronger the longer I worked at those depths. I remember the first time temptation got the better of me. We were drifting past the skeleton of a cargo ship, its rusted ribs jutting like bones against the endless dark. I wanted the perfect shot, something dramatic to show the world what lay hidden 3,000 feet below. My finger hovered over the flash button, heart hammering, until the captain's voice crackled through the intercom, colder than the water around us. "Don't even think about it," he said. The sudden sharpness of his tone felt like he'd read my mind, and I jerked my hand away. The warning rattled me, but it also made me wonder what exactly had happened to make him so afraid. The crew whispered stories when the captain wasn't around. One diver claimed that years ago, a photographer ignored the order and used his flash to capture a rare giant squid. The photo was never seen, because neither the man nor the submersible returned. Another told me of a salvage team that tried to document wreckage with heavy strobes, only to vanish without a trace. Their radio went dead mid-sentence, replaced by a sound like static and distant breathing. The wreck they were meant to photograph was later found twisted and torn apart, as if something had wrapped around it and crushed it like paper. I didn't know if these tales were exaggerated, but every time I looked into the darkness, I sensed a weight pressing back at me, like the ocean itself was aware of my presence. It wasn't like looking into empty space. It was like staring into a room full of strangers who refused to reveal themselves. My lens caught odd distortions, reflections where there shouldn't be, outlines that seemed too symmetrical to be natural. Once I could have sworn I saw a face pressed against the glass of the submersible window, pale and huge, before it vanished as quickly as it appeared. No one else claimed to see it, but I knew I wasn't imagining things. One night, while we were parked near a trench wall, the submersible's lights flickered, leaving us in near total darkness. The only glow came from my instrument panel, a faint green halo that barely cut through the black. My hands shook as I steadied the camera, every instinct screaming not to use the flash. The temptation clawed at me. I could capture something no one else in the world had ever seen, proof of the stories whispered in hushed voices. The thought made my palms sweat, but before I could act, a sound drifted through the hull. It wasn't a bang or scrape, but a long, slow movement, like something vast was shifting just outside our lights. I held my breath, listening as the sound circled us, slow and deliberate, brushing against the submersible's metal shell. My crewmate whispered a curse, gripping the railing with white knuckles, and the captain ordered us to stay perfectly still. Every second dragged like an hour, the dark pressing tighter, until the unseen thing finally drifted away into silence. Only then did I realize how close I had come to breaking the rule and how thin the line between safety and disaster really was. My finger had been trembling above the button, and had the lights not flickered back to life when they did, I might have doomed us all. The worst part came later, when I reviewed the footage. Despite never firing the flash, the last few seconds of recording showed a faint glimmer in the water, something reflective moving at the edge of the frame. It wasn't the glow of any known fish or creature, and it seemed far too large. The shape curved back around the sub, its reflection bending like glass, and though it faded into the dark, I could feel its attention even through the grainy playback. Watching it made me nauseous, as if the creature somehow knew I was staring. I shut the footage off and deleted it, not because I wanted to, but because keeping it felt like keeping a door half open. Since that night, the captain kept a closer eye on me. He warned that the ocean remembers those who tempt it, and that once you almost break a rule, the abyss will test you again. I tried to shake off his words, but deep down, I knew he was right. I had felt it, that heavy awareness, that hunger pressing in from all sides. It wasn't superstition anymore, it was survival, and as we prepared for our next descent, the weight of what nearly happened stayed with me, a whisper in the back of my mind that the abyss wasn't finished with me yet. When we descended again days later, I carried the same camera, the same unspoken urge, but this time the sea felt different. The water was too still, as if holding its breath. The silence seemed heavier, thicker, carrying an edge of anticipation that made my skin crawl. I tried to focus on the wreck ahead, the broken silhouette of another lost vessel, but my mind wouldn't quiet. I couldn't stop wondering what would have happened if I had pressed that button before. I couldn't stop thinking about the glimmer that shouldn't have been there, and as the submersible tilted toward the wreck, I saw something waiting in the shadows, something too large to belong here, and my blood ran cold. The captain warned me early on that curiosity was more dangerous than pressure at this depth, and he repeated it when we approached the shattered hull. His words were blunt. Rule 2. Never touch anything that doesn't belong to the wreck. I thought it meant avoiding loose debris that might collapse or sharp metal edges that could tear through a suit, but his expression carried a weight that went far beyond safety. It was as though the ocean left certain objects behind on purpose, and taking them invited something to follow you back. The wreck loomed ahead like a graveyard frozen in time, its rusting frame curled inward, eaten away by salt and darkness. My camera lens traced over fallen beams, broken cargo and strange objects scattered across the seabed. Some looked man-made, like crates torn open and gutted, while others seemed unnatural, too smooth and too perfectly shaped to be part of the ship. They almost glowed faintly in the submersible's dim beams, though no one else seemed to notice. My instinct screamed not to look too closely, but my curiosity kept pulling me back to them. One of the crew, a younger diver named Harris, wasn't as cautious. He joked that the ocean was full of treasure, and we'd be fools not to bring something back. His laugh echoed hollowly through the comms, masking the unease in his voice. I could see his gloved hand reaching out toward a small sphere half buried in the silt, smooth like polished stone, pulsing faintly, as if it held its own heartbeat. My chest tightened. Every fiber of me wanted to shout at him, to slap his hand away, but before I could speak, the captain's voice cut through the static like a knife. "Leave it," he ordered, sharper than I'd ever heard him. Harris froze, his fingers inches from the sphere, then pulled back reluctantly. "It's just a rock," he muttered, but the captain didn't argue. He simply said, "That's not from the wreck." His voice carried a finality that silenced us all. The way he said it made me shiver, as though he wasn't describing an object but a living thing. Harris scoffed but didn't try again, though I could see his eyes linger on the sphere with a hunger I didn't understand. Later, when I looked back at the footage, the object was gone, as though it had never been there at all. As we explored deeper into the wreck, the rule echoed in my head. I noticed more of those strange shapes, fragments that didn't match the ship's structure, glowing faintly with an otherworldly sheen. They didn't look corroded, they didn't look natural, and worst of all, they didn't look abandoned. It was as though they were waiting. My stomach turned each time I panned the camera across one, and I tried to focus only on the twisted metal and scattered tools that clearly belonged to the ship. Yet no matter how I avoided them, the objects always seemed to creep into the corner of my lens. That night, back in the surface lab, I couldn't resist scrolling through the images. At first, nothing seemed unusual, just wreckage and shadow. But then I noticed something strange. In one frame, the background behind Harris shimmered, like water bending around an invisible shape. In another, one of the glowing objects seemed closer to the submersible than it had been during the dive. When I zoomed in, I thought I saw faint lines across its surface, markings that looked disturbingly like eyes. My skin went cold, and I shut the laptop, refusing to look further. The next morning, Harris didn't show up for briefing. His bunk was empty, his suit missing, and no one claimed to see him leave. The captain didn't waste time searching. He simply said, "The sea takes back what's hers," and ordered us to continue. The silence that followed was heavier than the ocean itself, and I didn't ask questions. Still, I couldn't shake the thought that Harris had gone back for the sphere. That night, when I closed my eyes, I dreamed of him sinking into the dark, his hand wrapped tightly around something glowing, and 1,000 unseen hands pulling him deeper until he disappeared completely. On our next descent, I caught movement outside the window. At first, I thought it was a school of fish scattering, but the shapes moved too slowly, too deliberately. They slid through the water like shadows with weight, circling the wreck as though guarding it. My throat went dry as one drifted closer, brushing against the hull with a sound like sand sliding across glass. No one else acknowledged it, but I could feel the pressure shift, like the ocean itself had leaned closer. I gripped the camera tighter, whispering to myself that as long as I didn't touch what wasn't mine, I would be safe. But Harris's absence hung over us like a curse. At one point I thought I heard his voice faintly over the comms, static-laced and hollow, saying, "I brought it back." The captain cut the channel immediately and ordered silence, but the words clung to me, gnawing at my mind. If he had touched something, if he had carried it back, where had it gone now? And worse, what had followed him? My camera lens drifted over the seabed once more, and there, just beyond the wreck, I saw another sphere. It was larger than the one before, pulsing brighter, and this time it seemed to turn toward me. The captain barked for us to ascend, his tone sharp and urgent, but I couldn't look away. The sphere's glow grew brighter, and the shadows around it seemed to ripple as if dozens of shapes were shifting in the dark. My hands trembled, and for the briefest moment, I thought about reaching for it, drawn by an urge I couldn't explain. Then just as quickly, the lights of the submersible flickered, and the glow vanished, leaving only black water pressing against the glass. My pulse hammered in my ears, and I knew the ocean had given me a warning. But I also knew that curiosity had a way of finding cracks, and sooner or later, someone else would reach out. We broke the surface, the crew silent, the air heavy with what we'd left behind. I didn't ask about Harris again, and no one spoke of the glowing objects. But that night, as I checked my camera, I found something I couldn't explain. In the corner of one frame, there was a hand, pale human, pressed against the glass from the outside, and it wasn't mine. I'll never forget the first time I heard it, because the captain had warned me long before Rule 3. Never answer a voice that calls you by name below the surface. At the time, it sounded like one of those eerie superstitions divers invented to scare rookies. But after Harris vanished, and I found that pale hand in my photo, I started to take every word more seriously. The idea of a voice calling my name in the dark ocean seemed ridiculous, until I heard it myself, faint and trembling, threading through the static of my comms like someone whispering from just behind my ear. The first time it happened, we were descending along the trench wall, the black water pressing in tighter than usual. I kept my focus on the camera, trying to ignore the unease that lingered from Harris's disappearance. Then, through the steady crackle of the radio, I heard it, Daniel. My name stretched out, soft but distinct, like someone trying to coax me closer. I froze, my hands trembling over the controls, and looked at the others. None of them reacted. They were busy scanning their instruments. My throat dried as the voice came again, more insistent this time, curling through the static like a thread pulling at my chest. I almost answered before the captain's hand shot out and gripped my wrist. His eyes were locked on me, fierce and unblinking, and I knew instantly he had heard it too. He didn't speak, didn't explain, just shook his head slowly. The message was clear. Silence was survival. My heart pounded as the voice drifted through again, this time closer, sharper, almost impatient. I bit my tongue, fighting the instinct to respond, until the sound finally faded into the depths. When it was gone, the silence felt even heavier, like the sea was waiting for me to slip. Later, when I confronted the captain, his face turned grim. "The sea knows your name once you break a rule," he said. "It remembers, and it calls. If you answer, it comes closer." His words sank into me like lead, and I thought of the glowing spheres, of Harris's greedy hand, of the pale imprint on my photo. I wanted to believe he was exaggerating, but deep down I knew he wasn't. The ocean wasn't just water and pressure. It was something alive, something aware, and it had started calling me because I had come too close. The second time I heard the voice, I was alone in the submersible, tasked with documenting a deeper section of the trench. My comms were supposed to be silent, just static in my ears, but halfway down I heard it again. "Daniel," softer, this time almost kind, like a mother soothing a child. I clenched my jaw, gripping the camera so tightly my knuckles ached. The light outside caught something drifting past the window, a long pale shape that seemed to glide with deliberate grace. My heart hammered as the voice pressed in again, sharper now, "Answer me." I shut my eyes and whispered to myself, over and over, not to respond. But the hardest part wasn't resisting. The hardest part was how familiar it sounded. The voice didn't just call my name, it shifted. At one point it sounded like Harris, begging me to help him. Then like my sister's voice, gentle and pleading, echoing memories from a life far above the waves. Each time it changed, it dug deeper into me, clawing at my memories, making me want to believe. "Daniel, it's safe, I promise," it said once, the exact tone my sister used when I was a child, afraid of the dark. My hands shook so violently, I nearly dropped the camera. I bit my tongue until I tasted blood, forcing myself into silence. When I surfaced, pale and trembling, the captain didn't ask what happened. He just nodded, as if he already knew. "It'll keep trying," he said quietly. "Once it finds your name, it never stops." I wanted to ask what would happen if I gave in, if I let the sound pull me into its net, but I was too afraid to hear the answer. That night, in the safety of the crew quarters, I swore I heard my name whispered again, faint as breath, though no radio was turned on. I lay awake until dawn, the echo gnawing at my mind. Over the next few dives, the voice grew bolder. Sometimes it slipped in during routine checks, other times it bled through during silence, a low hum rising until it formed my name. The worst was when it began calling from outside the submersible, muffled but distinct, as though something enormous pressed its mouth against the hull. My skin prickled each time, my body screaming to flee, but there was nowhere to run. The deeper we went, the louder it grew, until it felt like the ocean itself was speaking through every drop around me. The crew began noticing changes in me. My hands shook, my eyes darted to corners, and I jumped at shadows outside the glass. I caught one of them whispering that I was marked, that the sea had chosen me like it had chosen Harris. The captain silenced them, but even his eyes carried doubt when he looked at me. I wanted to believe I was still in control, that silence would keep me safe, but each night the voice threaded deeper into my dreams. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart racing, convinced someone had whispered my name in the darkness just beside my bunk. The last time we descended that week, I felt weaker, more tired, as if the ocean had drained something vital from me. I sat with my camera, staring into the abyss, when the voice came again. This time it was urgent, sharp, almost angry. "Daniel, look at me." My body shook, as if invisible strings were tugging me toward the glass. Against my will, my eyes darted outside, and for a fraction of a second, I saw something staring back. It wasn't a face, not in the way we understand faces, but a vast arrangement of lights and lines, twisting together to mimic familiarity. It hovered there, waiting, as the voice whispered again, "Answer me." My throat tightened, words clawing to escape, but I bit down hard until tears stung my eyes. The captain shouted for emergency ascent, his voice breaking through the trance. Alarms blared as the submersible lurched upward, the pressure straining against us. The voice screamed my name now, filling my skull with unbearable force, until I thought my head would split open. Then, as suddenly as it came, silence returned, and the lights outside vanished into the abyss. My body slumped, trembling, knowing how close I had come to breaking. When we finally surfaced, I stayed behind in the submersible, too shaken to climb out immediately. My camera dangled useless in my lap, and I couldn't stop replaying the moment. The memory of that thing outside the glass burned into me, its impossible shape still etched in my mind. As I powered down the system, I glanced at the last image on my camera screen, and froze. It was me, staring into the lens, eyes wide, lips parted as if mid-sentence. But I hadn't taken that photo. And in the reflection behind me, something vast was still there, waiting. The rule sounded ridiculous when I first heard it. Why would it matter where I looked inside a sealed submersible? But the captain's tone had been dead serious when he warned me, Rule 4, never look directly into the windows after midnight dives. At first I thought it was just to keep us from spooking ourselves, since staring too long into black water can make your brain invent shapes. Still, after hearing voices that mimicked people I loved, after seeing pale hands pressed against the glass, I wasn't so quick to dismiss the warning anymore. Something about the night dives felt different, heavier, as though the darkness itself gained weight when the clock crossed midnight. Our schedules weren't always predictable. Sometimes research demanded long hours in the deep. That's how I found myself descending again past midnight, the hum of the engine soft against the crushing silence outside. The sea felt thicker at that hour, a blanket of black pressing down on us with more intent than usual. I tried to keep my eyes on the screens, monitoring depth and oxygen levels, but my instincts kept dragging me toward the windows. I told myself I was just tired, that curiosity was playing tricks, but the urge only grew stronger the deeper we went. The first incident happened when one of the crew, Marta, gave in to the temptation. We had parked near a jagged rock formation, waiting to collect readings, when I noticed her staring wide-eyed out the side window. Her breathing quickened over comms, ragged and uneven, as though she was running despite sitting perfectly still. "Do you see that?" she whispered, and my skin crawled. Her eyes darted as if tracking movement none of us could see. The captain barked at her to look away, but she wouldn't. She leaned closer, almost pressing her helmet against the glass, whispering to herself in a voice too low for us to hear. Then suddenly she screamed. The sound was raw, primal, tearing through my headphones, like something had sliced into her soul. She recoiled, knocking against the equipment, and the captain had to physically pull her away from the window. When she finally calmed, she refused to describe what she saw. Her lips trembled, and all she would say was, "It looked back." The way she said it hollowed me out, We had all seen things out there, shapes, shadows, tricks of light, but this was different. Whatever she saw had looked directly at her, and in that moment, I understood why the rule existed. From that night on, Marta was never the same. She barely spoke, and when she did, it was often to things that weren't there. Sometimes I'd hear her muttering in her bunk, conversations with someone only she could hear. Once I walked past her cabin and heard her whispering, "I can see you now," her tone almost affectionate. The captain confined her to quarters on the surface, but her presence lingered with us. Every time we dove after midnight, I imagined her face reflected in the glass, whispering for me to join her. I tried to push it from my mind, but the thought sank deeper each time. The next midnight dive tested me directly. I was alone in the submersible, recording footage of a descent near the trench. My orders were clear: avoid the windows, focus on the instruments. But as the depth increased, I felt it again, the pull. My eyes burned with the urge to glance sideways, to check if something was out there. It wasn't normal curiosity. It felt planted, like fingers tightening around my skull, turning my head against my will. Sweat dripped down my neck as I forced my gaze on the blinking console. The silence outside pressed harder, almost humming, and in the reflection of the screen, I swore I saw movement at the edge of the glass. The whisper came not through the comms, but from within my helmet, soft as breath. "Daniel." My own name again, curling through me with unbearable intimacy. My heart raced, hands trembling on the controls, as the reflection shifted. I saw a shape in the faint glow of the screen, impossibly close, like something pressed against the glass, waiting for me to look. My throat clenched. I wanted to look, every nerve in me screamed for it, but the captain's warning echoed in my skull. I dug my nails into my palm, until blood welled beneath my gloves, forcing myself to stay still. Seconds stretched into eternity. When I finally blinked, the reflection was gone, but the feeling of being watched lingered like ice down my spine. I surfaced pale, exhausted, my body shaking with the effort it had taken not to give in. The captain pulled me aside afterward, his face grave. "It gets stronger once you know it's there," he said. "That's why you never look. Once you do, you can't unsee it, and it doesn't stop staring back." His words sank into me like lead, confirming what I already feared. Marta hadn't just seen something. Something had seen her. The more I thought about it, the more the rule made sense. At that depth, midnight wasn't just a time, it was a threshold. The ocean felt different past that hour, like a curtain lifting, revealing a side of itself meant to stay hidden. Maybe the rules weren't about protecting us from accidents, but from attention, from drawing notice in a place where we were never meant to exist. I stopped asking questions. I stopped doubting, but I also started to fear the moment when my resolve would finally crack. Because the voice hadn't stopped calling, and the pull toward the glass was growing stronger each dive. It wasn't until our final descent of the week that the rule almost broke me. We hovered near a canyon wall, instruments humming softly, when the sub's lights flickered again. The darkness outside deepened, pressing against the windows like a living thing. Then in the reflection of the control panel, I saw it clearly, a face, not human, not exactly, but arranged to resemble one. Eyes too wide, mouth too still, features stretched in ways that mocked familiarity. It was right there, inches away, waiting. My stomach lurched, bile rising in my throat. Every part of me screamed to look, to confront it, to know what had been hunting me in the dark. My hand twitched toward the glass, but before I could turn, the captain's voice boomed through the comms. "Don't you dare." His tone cracked like a whip, jerking me back to myself. I sat frozen, every muscle trembling, as the reflection rippled and vanished. Silence returned, heavier than before, leaving me with the sickening certainty that whatever had been there wasn't gone. It was simply waiting for me to slip. And as the submersible began its slow ascent, I couldn't shake the cold truth that one night, no matter how hard I tried, I would. Of all the warnings I had heard, this one unsettled me the most. Rule 5. never swim toward a light that appears in the trench. The captain said it so firmly that I felt my stomach twist before he even explained why. Light at 3,000 feet doesn't exist naturally. Not the kind we're used to. There are no lanterns down there. No lamps. No human presence except ours. So when light appears, it isn't coming from us. It's coming from something else. At first I wondered if he meant strange bioluminescent creatures, but the way his voice caught in his throat told me it was something much worse. The first time I saw it was during a long survey mission. The trench spread beneath us like a mouth, swallowing everything that strayed too close. Our submersible lights traced over jagged cliffs and curling slopes of silt, but beyond that was nothing but a wall of black. Then faintly, something shimmered below, a pale glow, small at first, pulsing rhythmically as though it were breathing. My chest tightened as I leaned closer to the instruments, trying not to look directly through the glass. It looked wrong, too clean, too artificial, like a lone beacon calling me down. My hand drifted toward the controls before I caught myself. The captain noticed immediately. His voice thundered over comms, sharper than I'd ever heard. "Don't you move toward it," he barked. My heart jumped as I pulled my hand back, embarrassed by how close I had come to steering us downward. He steadied his tone then, quieter, but more urgent. "That isn't for you. It's a lure. If you chase it, you'll never come back." The rest of the crew stayed silent, but I could feel their unease hanging in the cramped sub like fog. None of us wanted to admit how tempting that glow had been, how it tugged at something inside us like a hook through skin. Later, one of the crew explained that lights like those had appeared to salvage teams before. Divers swam after them, thinking they had spotted another vessel, or even a lost comrade. They followed until their tethers snapped, or their oxygen gave out, but their bodies were never recovered. The worst part was the comms. The stories said those divers screamed at the end, not in fear, but in awe, like they had seen something so beautiful they didn't want to return. The thought haunted me. Beauty is supposed to mean safety, but down there it only meant danger wrapped in disguise. I began noticing how the glow seemed to pulse in time, with my heartbeat, faint but deliberate. The more I looked, the stronger the urge grew, until it felt like the light itself was aware of me. Sometimes it drifted closer, sometimes it faded deeper into the trench, but it never fully disappeared. It was patient, waiting, teasing me with the possibility of what lay beyond. Each time I forced my gaze away, locking my focus on the screens, but the pull gnawed at me. It whispered in the back of my mind that I could capture something no one else had ever photographed, something that would make me famous. On our third encounter, Marta, still shaken from her window incident, broke the silence. "It's calling me," she muttered, eyes glassy. My chest went cold as she leaned toward the glass, her lips parting like she meant to speak to it. The captain's voice snapped her back, sharp as a whip, but I saw it in her face. For a moment, she hadn't been with us at all. She had been somewhere else, somewhere the light had led her. It frightened me more than anything I had experienced so far, because I realized the light didn't just lure, it invaded. It got inside your head, planted seeds, and grew. That night, I dreamed of it. The glow filled the darkness, bright and soft, and I swam toward it without fear. The water didn't resist me. It cradled me, urging me forward. The closer I got, the more shapes appeared inside the light, faces I recognized, voices I longed to hear. Harris was there, smiling faintly, reaching for me. My sister's voice called out, warm and comforting. I was so close, just inches away, when the dream shattered, and I woke up gasping for air, drenched in sweat. My chest heaved as I realized the trench wasn't just calling me during dives, it was finding me in my sleep. During our next descent, I swore I wouldn't look. I kept my eyes glued to the blinking instruments, but temptation is a cruel thing. Out of the corner of my vision, the glow pulsed again. It was brighter this time, larger, like a doorway opening in the abyss. My pulse quickened, sweat rolling down my back. I clenched my fists, digging my nails into my palms, but it wasn't enough. My eyes drifted toward it, just for a second, and what I saw nearly broke me. The light wasn't solid, it shifted, folding in on itself, revealing outlines inside, not fish, not divers, things too large to comprehend, pressing closer as if waiting for me to step through. I tore my gaze away, breathing hard, praying no one had noticed, but I knew the truth. I had looked, even if only briefly, and the light had noticed me in return. That night, the dreams came back, sharper and clearer. Harris's face leaned closer, his mouth opening to speak, but when words formed, they weren't his. They were something older, heavier, layered with voices that didn't belong to anything human. I woke with blood on my tongue, from biting it, heart hammering, certain that if I'd listened longer, I wouldn't have woken at all. The captain cornered me the next day. He didn't need to ask. He saw it in my eyes. It saw you, didn't it? His voice was heavy with resignation. I couldn't answer, but my silence was enough. He nodded grimly. It will try harder now. That's how it works. It shows you what you want most, and once you step toward it, you're theirs. His words chilled me deeper than the water itself, because I already knew he was right. The light wasn't gone. It was waiting, patient and certain, knowing one day my will would crack. The worst part came on our last dive of the month. As we drifted above the trench, every monitor flickered, the sub's lights dimming until the only glow came from below. The trench lit up like a lantern, brighter than ever before, shadows writhing inside it. Every one of us froze, breathing shallow, terrified of what would happen if we moved. Then through the comms I heard my name again, soft, coaxing, layered with voices that should have been comforting, but instead felt like hooks digging under my skin. My vision blurred, my body leaning forward before I could stop it. The light was so close, so inviting, and for a moment, I believed stepping into it would mean peace. But then the glow shifted, and I saw what waited inside. Not faces, not comfort, teeth, endless rows of teeth, stretching into blackness, spiraling in patterns that twisted reality itself. My breath caught, horror flooding me as I realized what the lower really was. The captain slammed the controls, jerking the sub upward, tearing us away from the glow before it could swallow us whole. My body trembled violently, heart pounding so hard I thought my chest would burst. And even as the darkness swallowed the light again, I knew it wasn't gone. It would wait for me, patient as always, and next time I wasn't sure I'd have the strength to resist. I didn't want to believe this one until it happened to me. Rule 6. Never acknowledge the voices that call your name beneath the waves. The rule sounded almost childish when I first read it, like something meant to scare rookies away from the depths. But when you're suspended miles below the surface, in darkness so absolute, it feels like you've fallen into the void between stars. Your mind plays tricks, or maybe it isn't your mind at all. That's what I realized the first time I heard someone whisper my name in the water. It began faintly, through the static of the comms. At first I thought Marta was calling me, her voice clipped by interference, but when I turned she was asleep, her helmet tilted back, breathing steady. The others were silent too. Still, the voice persisted, threading through the hum of the engines, soft and insistent. Daniel, my blood froze. No one had said my name in that tone since my sister years ago before she died. My hands shook on the console, torn between answering and pretending I hadn't heard a thing. I forced myself to stay quiet, remembering the rule, but silence felt like suffocating. The next time, it wasn't through comms at all. I was tethered outside the sub, inspecting the hull where pressure gauges had gone haywire. My breath echoed inside my helmet, the only sound besides the distant groan of shifting water. Then, like silk threading through the abyss, came a whisper. Daniel. It vibrated through the current, not mechanical, not electronic, alive. I spun, my light cutting across endless black, but there was nothing there. Still, I knew the sound had been close, closer than it should have been. My oxygen ticked down faster as panic quickened my breath. and I clung to the tether with shaking hands. The voices grew bolder with each dive. Sometimes they sounded like people I trusted. Harris, Marta, even the captain. Other times they were strangers, speaking in a language I almost understood but couldn't quite grasp. Always they called my name, pulling at me with tones of affection, anger, desperation. They weren't random sounds. They knew me intimately, like something that had studied me for years. That thought chilled me more than the water ever could. Whatever they were, they wanted me to answer, to give them permission to step closer, and the worst part was how badly I wanted to. Sleep became impossible. I'd close my eyes and drift, only to jolt awake as a voice whispered just beyond my ear. Once I swore I felt breath against my cheek, warm and damp, though I was sealed inside my bunk. I told myself it was the stress, the isolation, the endless pressure of the abyss messing with my head. But deep down, I knew the truth. The rules weren't written for superstition. They were written because someone before me had made the mistake of answering. I didn't need to know what happened to them to understand the danger. Still, curiosity gnawed at me, whispering the same question over and over. What if I did answer? One dive, I nearly found out. We were skimming the edge of the trench when the comms crackled, and my sister's voice filled my helmet. Not just similar, hers, exactly. Gentle, trembling, the way she used to sound when she was scared. "Danny, it's me. Please help me." My throat closed and tears stung my eyes. She'd drowned years ago in a boating accident, long before I ever joined the crew. Hearing her again was like having her ghost press against my chest. My mouth opened before I realized, breath catching on the edge of her name. But then the captain's hand clamped down on my shoulder, wrenching me back to reality. His eyes, wide and furious, said everything. "Don't you dare." After that, I started noticing patterns. The voices always came strongest when we lingered near the trench, as though it were their hive. They never shouted, never threatened, always coaxed, always intimate, like a lover's whisper or a family's plea. Sometimes I'd hear multiple voices weaving together, harmonizing my name until it felt like a chant. Other times, one single voice would lean close, dragging syllables like claws across my skull, and the temptation grew unbearable. Not because I believed it was truly my sister, but because I wanted it to be. That's how they worked. The voices weren't random. They were tailored, sculpted into the exact sounds you most longed to hear. The crew wasn't immune either. I caught Marta one night, pacing the narrow corridor, whispering softly under her breath. Her lips moved like she was answering someone only she could hear. When I touched her arm, she jolted as if waking from a dream, her face pale and trembling. She never admitted what she'd heard, but I didn't need her words. The look in her eyes told me everything. The voices weren't after just me. They were patient, circling each of us, waiting for the weakest moment to strike. One evening, while I sat in my bunk fighting sleep, the whisper came again, but this time it wasn't coaxing, it was angry. "Daniel." The sound reverberated like thunder, muffled by water, sharp and venomous. "You hear us, you belong to us." I froze, every nerve screaming. For the first time I understood that ignoring them wasn't silence. They knew I heard, they knew I resisted, and now they were changing tactics. The thought clawed at my mind. What happens when they get tired of waiting? The final straw came during our last survey dive of that week. The trench loomed below, blacker than sin, when the voices surged all at once. My name roared through the comms, through the water, through my very skull. It wasn't one voice anymore. It was hundreds, thousands, layered on top of each other, echoing like a cathedral filled with ghosts. I gripped the console, teeth rattling, vision blurring under the weight of the sound. The others sat frozen, faces pale, because they heard it too. For once it wasn't just me. Then silence. Sudden, suffocating silence. My chest heaved as the void swallowed the echoes, leaving only my pulse in my ears. And then from somewhere below, the faintest whisper, "Answer us." I bit my tongue hard enough to bleed, choking down the instinct to speak. My lips burned, trembling with the weight of words unsaid. The captain slammed the controls, dragging us upward, but I couldn't shake the certainty that the voices weren't finished. They'd tried kindness. They'd tried love. Now they were trying fury. What came next, I didn't want to know. As the sub lurched toward the surface, I pressed back in my seat, eyes wide, feeling the cold seep deeper than ever before. Because in the corner of my vision, pressed against the glass outside, something pale and human-shaped drifted in the dark. Its lips moved, silently forming my name. And for the first time, I realized the voices weren't always disembodied. Sometimes they had faces. At first I laughed at this one. Rule 7: never swim toward the lights that appear in the trench. It felt like the kind of warning you'd give a child afraid of monsters in the dark. But down there where no sunlight reaches, and the abyss stretches into forever, light is more dangerous than darkness. Light means something alive, something luring you closer, something that shouldn't exist 3 miles beneath the surface. And I learned the hard way that those lights don't just shine, they beckon. The first time I saw them, I thought they were just equipment, a cluster of faint blue glows flickering along the edge of the trench, like warning beacons. I signaled to the captain, thinking maybe another crew had been here before us, leaving markers behind. But the captain didn't look relieved. His jaw tightened, and he muttered for me to keep my distance. That was when I realized no one sane would ever plant lights this deep. Whatever they were alive. On the next dive I saw them again, this time closer, brighter, pulsing like the steady rhythm of a heartbeat. They shimmered in shifting patterns, sometimes aligning in neat rows, other times drifting apart like stars scattered in the void. My instincts told me to stay away, but my curiosity pulled me forward. There was something hypnotic about the way they moved, as if they were aware of my gaze, as if they wanted me to notice. I had to grip the tether hard just to keep from drifting toward them. The crew rarely talked about the lights. If you asked, they'd shrug it off with a joke, or change the subject. But in their silence, I read the truth. Everyone had seen them. Everyone had felt the pull. Marta admitted once, in a whisper, that she dreamed of them, even when she closed her eyes in the safety of the sub. She said they reminded her of home, of city streets at night. I didn't tell her, but I'd had the same dreams, walking toward a glowing horizon that turned into the trench. Always the trench. One night, tethered outside the sub to secure a loose panel, I found myself staring too long. The lights gathered in a perfect circle, soft blue rings pulsing in synchronization. They formed a path, a staircase spiraling downward into blackness. My legs twitched, urging me to follow. My chest tightened with longing so sharp it felt like hunger. It wasn't just visual, it was emotional. The promise of something I'd lost, something waiting at the bottom. I barely noticed I'd loosened my grip on the tether until Harris yanked me back, shouting into the comms. He saved me, but he didn't meet my eyes afterward. I think he understood. He'd been close once too. The lights grew more insistent after that. Sometimes they appeared right beside the sub, pressing against the glass like curious fish. Other times they pulsed in the distance, always at the trench's lip, always just far enough to lure someone foolish enough to swim closer. And the longer I stared, the more I realized they weren't random. They formed patterns, shapes I almost recognized, symbols carved from light itself. At first they looked like constellations, then they looked like eyes. The captain tried to reroute our dives, steering wide around the trench whenever possible. But even then, the lights followed. They weren't confined to the abyss. They wanted us. And with every passing day, I felt the magnetic pull in my chest grow stronger. It wasn't just temptation anymore, it was compulsion. I began to wonder if anyone could resist forever. One night Marta didn't. She'd been quiet for days, her eyes ringed with shadows. I woke to alarms blaring, the hatch slamming open, and the sudden hiss of pressurization. She'd suited up alone, slipped past the others, and launched herself into the water without a word. By the time we reached the viewport, she was already a silhouette vanishing into the glow. The lights embraced her, wrapping around her body like a lover's arms. She didn't struggle. She didn't scream. She drifted downward, swallowed by the spiral, until her form dissolved into the abyss. We never saw her again. After Marta, the crew grew quieter. No one spoke of her, but every one of us saw the same truth in each other's eyes. It would happen again. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually the lights would claim someone else. The rules weren't a choice, they were survival. And yet, despite everything, I couldn't erase the memory of her face as she disappeared. She hadn't looked afraid. She'd looked at peace, that haunted me more than anything. On our last dive near the trench, I sat at the viewport alone, staring out into the dark. I told myself I wouldn't look, but the moment they appeared, I couldn't turn away. The light spiraled upward, this time rising toward me like a staircase leading home. My chest ached with longing, and for one terrifying moment, I imagined stepping out of my suit, stripping away the weight of oxygen and pressure, and drifting bare into their glow. No pain, no fear, no voices, just light. But as the thought consumed me, I noticed something I hadn't before. Behind the glow, deeper in the trench, shadows moved, shapes vast and unrecognizable, their outlines blurred by water, but undeniably there. The lights weren't leading us to salvation, they were leading us to them. The realization hit too late, because even as I recoiled, the lights pulsed once more, brighter, harsher, like a command. And against the glass, I saw something press close, a pale human hand, fingers splayed, glowing faintly from within, as if the light had crawled inside it. It tapped once, twice, against the viewport. Then the rest of the figure emerged from the glow, Marta's face, pale and hollow, her eyes empty orbs of light. She smiled. The captain warned me about this one on my second week. Rule 8. If you hear knocking on the submarine walls, do not answer. I thought he was joking at first, because what could possibly knock 3 miles beneath the surface? But when I finally heard it, when the hollow taps echoed through steel, as if someone were rapping their knuckles right outside my window, I understood that it wasn't a joke. It was a threat, and worse, it sounded human. The first time, I was alone in the observation chamber, reviewing the day's photographs. A single knock reverberated through the hull, sharp and distinct, like the sound of wood on metal. I froze, convinced it had to be equipment shifting. Then came a second knock, softer, followed by 3 in rapid succession. A pattern. My chest went cold. I leaned toward the viewport, despite every instinct screaming at me not to. The darkness stared back. Nothing. No fish. No debris. Only the quiet hum of the sub's engines, and the lingering rhythm of those knocks in my head. I tried to dismiss it when I returned to the others, but Harris's face told me everything. He didn't ask if I heard something. He asked how many times. His voice trembled when I told him. He whispered that it always starts with 1, then 2, then 3. He said the worst thing you can do is knock back, no matter how much it sounds like someone asking for help. 2 nights later, it happened again. This time, louder, 5 knocks in a row, spaced evenly apart. I pressed my ear to the metal, and for a split second I swore I heard something beneath the sound, a faint hiss, like someone breathing through water. My throat tightened. Whatever it was, they were waiting. They wanted acknowledgement. I clenched my fists and forced myself away from the wall, but Marta wasn't there anymore, and her absence was a raw wound in the crew. Maybe that's why we all grew paranoid. We didn't trust each other as much. The lights outside haunted us, but the knocks, those were intimate. They came for you when you were alone, when your guard was down, when you were tired enough to believe anything. I started sleeping with my headphones in, blasting static just to drown out the possibility. It didn't help. The knocks grew louder, insistent, rattling the very air around me. I wasn't the only one. Harris admitted one morning that he'd heard it too. 7 knocks, rapid fire, as though fists were hammering for entry. He said he almost answered, almost lifted his fist against the wall before he remembered the rule. His hands shook as he spoke, and I realized with dawning horror that the sound wasn't confined to one part of the submarine. It moved. It traveled. The knocking circled us, shifting from one hull plate to another, like something pacing outside. Then came the night it mimicked a voice. I woke in my bunk, to the faint tap 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 at the walls, steady and patient. I held my breath, willing it to stop, and then between knocks, a whisper curled through the metal, warped by water but still terrifyingly clear. My name. The syllables dragged out, distorted but unmistakable. It wasn't Marta's voice. It wasn't anyone I knew, but it was calling for me specifically. My blood iced over. I buried my face in my pillow, resisting the urge to scream. The captain doubled our shifts after that, insisting we stay in pairs, but even that didn't save us. One evening, while Harris and I were monitoring sonar, the knocking began again. This time, it shook the entire chamber, violent, furious, then silence. We both leaned forward, sweat dripping, waiting for the next strike. That's when the sonar pinged. A single echo came back, slow and deliberate, not like the scatter of fish or debris. It was shaped like us, a shadow the same size as the submarine, following along our hull. The crew panicked. Some swore it was pressure, others said it was faulty readings, but I saw the terror in their eyes. We all knew better. The knocks weren't random, they were deliberate, and whatever was making them was learning. It got worse when Carter broke. He was the youngest of us, barely 22, curious for his own good. One night, when the knocking grew steady outside the engineering bay, he snapped. He pounded his fists against the wall, shouting into the darkness, demanding to know who was out there. The rest of us scrambled to pull him back, but it was too late. The moment his fists hit metal, the knocking stopped. Total silence. That silence lasted 3 days. We thought maybe it had ended, that ignoring it worked. But then on the 4th night, a new sound came. Not knocking, scraping, long drawn-out drags along the hull, as if fingernails or claws were testing the surface. The sound followed us, moving from room to room, pausing just long enough for us to hope it was gone before starting again. And then, without warning, the power flickered. Emergency lights bathed the sub in red. The comms sputtered static, and from deep within the vessel came a sound none of us had ever heard before, knocking from the inside. We tore through the halls, searching for the source, but it was everywhere at once. Every bulkhead echoed with raps and thuds, patterns too precise to be random. My ears rang with it, my head spun, and I felt an overwhelming sense that we weren't alone anymore. Something had gotten in, something Carter had invited. When we reached the observation chamber, the viewport was fogged, as though someone had pressed their breath against it from outside. Through the condensation, faint shapes shifted, human outlines, blurred by water, too many to count. Hands pressed against the glass, their fingers pale and warped, their mouths opening and closing soundlessly. They knocked in unison, the rhythm pounding into my skull. And then among them, I saw her, Marta, her glowing eyes fixed on mine, her hands leaving streaks on the viewport. She mouthed something I couldn't hear, my name again. Over and over, the lights flickered, the glass creaked, and the last knock reverberated so hard it rattled my teeth. That was when the captain screamed for everyone to brace, because something outside wasn't knocking anymore. It was trying to push its way in. The captain's voice was grave when he first explained it. Rule 9, never open the hatch after midnight, no matter what you hear outside. He didn't embellish, didn't tell stories, didn't even give a reason, just that one line, like an order carved into stone. At the time, it seemed absurd. We were thousands of feet below the surface, locked in steel thicker than my torso. Who would even think of opening the hatch down here? But the deeper we stayed, the stranger the nights became. Midnight was when everything changed. I learned quickly that time behaves differently underwater. The hours blur, light never shifts, and the clocks feel like they lie. Midnight carried a weight here, though. You could feel it in the hum of the engines, in the way the shadows seemed darker, thicker, heavier. The knocks we'd grown used to fell silent then, as though even they respected some unspoken boundary. But the silence didn't bring peace. It brought voices. The first time I heard them, I thought it was a dream. A soft murmur in the corridor outside my bunk, like someone whispering through a wall. I pressed my ear against the door and realized it wasn't just one voice. Dozens all speaking at once, muffled, urgent, as though pleading to be let in. My pulse thundered. I clutched my blanket and forced myself to stay put, remembering the captain's words. But then through the whispers, I heard something worse. Marta's voice, clear as glass, calling my name. I almost moved, almost opened the hatch to the corridor and followed the sound. But when I reached for the handle, I felt a strange vibration, a subtle pulsing heat in the metal, as though something living pressed against it from the other side. I jerked my hand back, trembling. Harris wasn't so lucky. On his night shift, he swore he heard his sister outside. He hadn't spoken much about her, but I'd seen him holding a photograph in his quarters, the edges worn soft. He said she was calling him, her voice faint but unmistakable, drifting through the hatch. He argued with himself for hours, pacing like a madman, until he couldn't take it anymore. I wasn't there when it happened, but I heard the alarm later, screams echoing through the hull. Harris had unsealed the engineering bay hatch at 12:47 a.m. We reached the chamber minutes after the breach. The hatch was open, water seeping in. No Harris, no body, only the wrench he'd carried, clattering slowly across the floor as the pressure equalized. The captain slammed the emergency lock, sealing us in before the whole compartment flooded. No one spoke a word, but we all knew he wasn't coming back. That night the voices grew bolder. They no longer whispered, they sang. A low harmonic hum that threaded through the sub's metal bones, vibrating in my teeth and rattling my ribs. It was beautiful and wrong, all at once, a sound that felt like it was written for human ears, but not made by human mouths. Some of the crew cried, others covered their ears, but none of us could escape it. The captain gathered us after, and spoke only once. They know you now, don't listen. But how could we not? 2 days later, Carter broke again. He hadn't slept since Harris vanished. His eyes were red, his lips cracked, his hands trembling constantly. That night he heard his mother's voice outside the central hatch. He sprinted there before anyone could stop him. I chased him down the corridor, shouting, but he turned on me with such wild desperation that I froze. He pressed his ear to the hatch, smiling like a child, nodding as though responding to something only he could hear. Then he unsealed it. The moment the door cracked, a blast of freezing brine shot through, but it wasn't water that terrified me. It was the hand, pale skeletal fingers, forcing their way through the gap, clawing desperately for purchase. Carter screamed, wrenching the door wider as though welcoming them. I tackled him, slamming the release to force the hatch shut again, severing those fingers. The shriek that followed didn't belong underwater or on land. It was something older, something furious. The severed digits dissolved into salt, leaving nothing but slime on the floor. Carter hasn't spoken since. He stares at the walls now, lips moving silently, as though still in conversation with what called to him. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I catch him smiling. After that, we doubled the locks, padlocks, welded plates, anything to keep the hatches sealed. But still, every midnight, the voices returned. They shifted now, adjusting, using names they shouldn't know. Once I heard my father, then a teacher I hadn't seen in years. Once even my own voice echoed back at me, pleading to be let in. The pressure inside the submarine was nothing compared to the pressure inside our minds. Each midnight dragged us closer to breaking. I caught myself standing before the hatch, more than once, palm hovering just inches from the handle, sweat dripping as the voices begged, promised, bargained. They spoke of air, of light, of freedom from the crushing black. And then came the night, when the voices went silent. At first I thought it was mercy. I sat in my bunk, waiting, ears straining, but nothing, no whispers, no song, no calling, just silence. The others noticed it too, exchanging wary glances. That was when the scratching began. Slow at first, like nails dragging along metal, then faster, sharper, until sparks flew from the hinges. The hatch shuddered with the impact of something slamming against it again and again. My chest seized as the steel bulged inward, the locks groaning under the strain. It wasn't voices anymore. It wasn't deception. Whatever was outside wanted in, and it wasn't going to wait for someone to answer. We scrambled, reinforcing the door with anything we could find. Tables, pipes, welded sheets. The captain barked orders, his voice hoarse, but I could see fear in his eyes. The hatch bent further with each slam, as though something massive hurled itself at us in the dark. The sound echoed through the sub like thunder, and with each impact, I swore I could hear the faintest hint of laughter woven into the violence. The final slam nearly tore the hinges free, and then silence again. Not the comforting kind, the waiting kind. We stood in that silence for hours, weapons in hand, hearts pounding, expecting another assault, but none came. Eventually, exhaustion dragged us under. I don't remember closing my eyes, only the nightmare that followed. Water flooding my cabin, Marta's face inches from mine, her hand guiding mine to the hatch handle. When I jerked awake, I found my body already standing in the corridor, my hand just inches from turning the real handle. I stumbled back, horrified. Something wasn't just calling us anymore, it was moving us. And that's when the lights flickered, and from the observation chamber came the sound of the outer locks disengaging. I never thought glass could feel alive until that night. The captain had warned us from the beginning. Rule 10. If the observation window frosts over, do not look directly into it. He delivered it the same way he delivered all the rules, clipped and clinical, as if reading from a manual that none of us had seen. At the time I thought it was superstition, maybe some strange sailor's tradition, but when the frost first crept across the glass, blooming in delicate veins like spiderwebs of ice, I understood the weight behind his words. The observation chamber was supposed to be our lifeline to the outside world. It was where we logged marine activity, tracked currents, and if we were lucky, caught glimpses of deep-sea creatures rarely seen by human eyes. I had spent hours pressed against that window, marveling at the abyss, watching lanternfish shimmer like scattered stars. But that night, the beauty was gone. The cold came from nowhere, seeping into the steel, snaking across the circular glass in twisting, deliberate lines. Within minutes, the frost sealed the window in white. At first, it looked harmless, just condensation crystallizing, like a freezer door left open too long. But then the pattern shifted. The frost spread in shapes, too symmetrical, too purposeful, curves that resembled eyes, spirals that seemed to pulse as if breathing. One of the crew, Novak, leaned closer, squinting at the designs. He shouldn't have. He didn't even touch the glass. All he did was stare, pupils widening, as though caught by something on the other side. His breath slowed, his lips parted slightly, and for a moment, he looked like he was drowning on dry land. I called his name, but he didn't respond. His hand twitched, reaching out, and before I could grab him, he pressed his palm flat against the window. The frost spread instantly, crawling up his arm in jagged veins. He screamed, stumbling back, clawing at his sleeve. When I pulled the fabric up, his skin was pale, frost-bitten from shoulder to fingertips, the veins beneath his flesh dark as ink. He collapsed, convulsing, whispering words that made no sense, words that didn't sound like any language I knew. We dragged him to the infirmary, but he never recovered. His body went rigid, his mouth frozen open as though locked mid-breath. By morning, he was gone, just another empty bunk, and a warning we were too slow to learn. After Novak, none of us dared look too closely at the frost. We sealed the chamber, bolted the door, and swore to avoid it. But that didn't stop the frost from spreading. It seeped through the seams of the glass, trickling across the walls in branching patterns. The steel groaned under its weight, ice hissing as though alive. Some nights, when the silence pressed too heavy, I swore I could hear faint tapping from beyond the glass, like fingernails clicking against the frozen pane. Harris's empty bunk reminded me of what waited beyond the hatches. Novak's corpse reminded me of what waited in the frost. Between them, it felt like there was nowhere safe on this sub. And then came the knocking. It started soft, rhythmic, as if someone was trapped on the other side of the observation window, begging to be let in. Carter, still half mad from before, began muttering, "They're cold, they need warmth." He shuffled toward the chamber door one night, his eyes glazed, his lips trembling with something close to worship. We held him back, but his strength was unnatural. It took 3 of us to pin him down before he could unseal the door. The captain made a decision then. He ordered the chamber welded shut, sacrificing our view of the ocean. "We don't need to see them," he said, his voice raw. "We need to survive." But his eyes lingered on the door longer than they should have, as though even he wasn't sure if sealing it was enough. For a while it seemed to work. The frost no longer crept beyond the chamber, and the knocks quieted. We allowed ourselves to breathe. But relief is a dangerous thing down here. It makes you lower your guard. One night, when I was on watch, I felt the air shift. The temperature plummeted so fast that my breath fogged instantly. My skin prickled, and a thin film of frost crept across the bulkhead before me. My stomach dropped. The chamber was sealed, yet the frost was here. I turned, slowly, and my heart nearly stopped. The observation window was behind me. It shouldn't have been. The chamber was sealed off, welded, inaccessible. But there it was, the circular glass pane, rimmed in ice, whispering as frost spread across its surface. And worse, it was glowing faintly, a pale blue radiance that pulsed like a heartbeat. I stumbled backward, refusing to look directly into the center. Every instinct screamed at me to turn, to flee, but my body betrayed me. My gaze flicked up, just for a fraction of a second, and I saw them. Faces, pressed against the glass from the other side. Dozens of them, pale and distorted, eyes too wide, mouths stretched impossibly thin. They weren't human anymore, but fragments of what used to be crewmen, strangers, shapes that flickered between identities, like shifting masks. Their eyes locked on mine, and in that instant, I felt them pull, not physically, but into my mind, tugging at my thoughts, my memories. I tore my eyes away, collapsing against the wall, gasping as though I'd surfaced after drowning. The frost melted instantly, vanishing as though it had never been there. But the image of those faces burned behind my eyelids, refusing to fade. Since that night, I've caught glimpses of frost in places it doesn't belong. The mirror in the washroom, the porthole above my bunk, even the polished surface of a spoon. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I feel cold breath on my skin, and I know they're still watching. The captain hasn't spoken about it again, but the welds on the observation chamber are thicker now, doubled and tripled, as if steel alone can hold back whatever waits behind that glass. But I know better. They don't need the window to reach us anymore. The frost is a doorway, and it's spreading. Last night, I woke to find Carter standing over me, his skin pale, his eyes rimmed with frost. He didn't blink, didn't speak. He just pointed toward the corridor. When I followed his finger, I saw the frost blooming across the main hatch, and this time, it wasn't just shapes in the ice. It was a hand, pressing out from the other side. There is no sound more terrifying than your own voice when it doesn't belong to you. From the very beginning, the captain warned us. Rule 11. If you hear your own voice calling from the water, do not answer it. The way he said it chilled me more than the rule itself, because his eyes darted to the floor as though remembering something he wished he could forget. Back then, I laughed it off. How could the water speak? How could it mimic me? After everything we'd seen, I should have known better. The first time it happened was during a midnight inspection of the ballast tanks. The corridors were silent, except for the creak of steel under pressure. My flashlight beam cut through the damp air, glinting off rivets slick with condensation. Then I heard it, my own voice, whispering my name. Daniel. It was faint, distorted, but unmistakably me. I froze, thinking someone was playing a cruel trick. But the voice came again, stronger, rising from the sealed grates beneath my boots. Every nerve in my body screamed to answer, to say something, even just a word. It wasn't curiosity, it was compulsion, like something tugging at my throat, forcing me to respond. My lips parted before I realized what I was doing, and I barely bit down on my tongue in time to stop myself. The taste of blood grounded me. I staggered back from the grate, heart hammering. The voice didn't follow, but I knew then that this wasn't superstition. This was real. The others weren't so lucky. Mara was the first to slip. She had always been strong, level-headed, the kind of person who laughed in the face of danger. But when she heard her own voice echoing down the flooded maintenance shaft, she laughed nervously and answered, "Very funny." We all heard it, her voice calling from below, then her voice answering back, and then silence. By the time we reached her, the shaft was empty. All that remained was her flashlight, floating on the surface, beam flickering until the water swallowed it whole. After Mara, we took the rule more seriously. No one spoke near the water. We carried chalk to write messages on the walls. We tapped in coded rhythms, anything to avoid the temptation. But the voices grew bolder. They didn't just whisper our names anymore. They began speaking in full sentences, weaving words we longed to hear. My voice told me my brother was still alive, waiting just beyond the hatch. Novak's voice promised him warmth, relief from the endless cold. Carter's voice told him the frost could be reversed if he just opened the door. The worst part wasn't hearing them. It was knowing they knew us. Whoever or whatever was down here understood our secrets, our grief, our desires. They used our own voices as bait, hooks cast into the deepest parts of our hearts. And sometimes, when the pressure and darkness grew too heavy, I wanted to bite. I wanted to answer. The captain confessed one night that he had answered once years ago, during a dive in the Norwegian trench. He didn't say what he heard, only that when he spoke back, something answered in perfect unison. "It knows how to wear your skin," he whispered, trembling. "It knows how to climb inside you." I wanted to press him for details, but he shut down, his eyes hollow. After that, I stopped asking. But the voices didn't stop. They multiplied. Soon it wasn't just one version of me calling. It was dozens, all speaking at once, overlapping, pleading, taunting. Sometimes they begged for help. Other times they mocked, repeating my thoughts before I even said them aloud. It was like standing in a hall of mirrors, where every reflection sneered back in delay. And then one night, they changed their tone. Instead of calling from the water, my voice called from behind me. I spun, flashlight beam cutting through the dark, but there was no one there. My pulse quickened. It had never come from inside the sub before. The walls pressed closer, the frost crawled in strange patterns across the ceiling, and the voices, my voices, laughed. That was when I realized we weren't resisting an external threat anymore. The sea wasn't trying to lure us out, it was trying to get in. One by one, the crew began to unravel. Harris scribbled messages on the walls in chalk, until his fingers bled, convinced the voices were reading his thoughts, and that only writing could silence them. Carter stopped sleeping altogether, pacing the corridors, muttering back at the whispers he swore he wasn't answering. The captain locked himself in his quarters, emerging only to issue orders in a voice that sounded thinner every day, as if part of him had already answered. And me, I tried to resist. I plugged my ears, I sang to myself, I pressed my palms against steel, until the pain drowned out the whispers. But the sea is patient. It waits. It knows exhaustion will eventually wear me down. Then came the night when all of us heard it together. We were gathered in the mess hall when a voice boomed through the ventilation shafts. Not one voice, every voice. All of ours overlapping, echoing from every direction. My voice begged me to follow. Mara's voice laughed from the drain. Harris's voice recited numbers none of us understood. The cacophony was unbearable, vibrating through the walls, rattling dishes off shelves. And through it all, one phrase repeated, clear and commanding. "Answer us." The lights flickered. Frost burst across the windows. The hull groaned as though gripped by colossal hands. We held our ground, silent, trembling, until the voices faded. When it was over, 3 bunks were empty. No struggle, no sound, just gone. That was last week. Now only I remain. The captain is gone. Carter is gone. Harris is gone. Whether they answered or the sea simply claimed them, I don't know, but their voices still called to me, weaving through the metal, echoing from the water beyond. I don't know how much longer I can resist. Last night, I heard my own voice again, closer than ever, whispering through the frost that rimmed the inside of my bunk. "Daniel," it said softly, with all the warmth of a friend. "You've done well, but you don't have to fight anymore. Just answer, and it will all be over." I wanted to. God, I wanted to. My lips trembled, shaping the word before I bit down so hard, blood spilled onto my pillow. It saved me, but I don't know if I have the strength to do it again. The frost is spreading faster now, veins of ice threading across every surface. The lights fail more often than they stay on. And beneath it all, the voices are merging into one. Something vast, something ancient, something waiting in the dark. I know this journal will never reach the surface, but if by some impossible chance you are reading these words, remember this final rule. When the sea calls you in your own voice, when it speaks with your mouth, your heart, your memories, do not answer. No matter how much you want to. No matter how much you believe it, because once you do, it's not just your voice anymore, it's theirs. And they're always hungry for one more.